On the night of September 14, 1981, 12 men clocked into work at a Portsmouth, Ohio loading dock. By 3 a.m., all 12 had vanished without a trace. No screams, no witnesses, just 12 lunch pails left behind on a break room table, coffee still warm in the pot, and a barge carrying $340,000 worth of industrial chemicals that had simply disappeared into the darkness. The FBI would later call it the perfect elimination, but the truth was far simpler and far more tragic. These men weren't criminals. They were fathers, husbands, veterans who made one desperate choice when America's economy collapsed around them, and that choice cost them everything. What if I told you that 12 ordinary men were murdered not because they committed a crime, but because they were poor enough to consider it? That organized crime didn't target drug dealers or rival gangsters, but dock workers with mortgages they couldn't pay and children they couldn't feed? This is the story of the Ohio River Disappearances, where desperation became a death sentence and the American dream turned into an American nightmare. Portsmouth, Ohio, September 1981. The city was dying slowly, like a patient everyone had given up on. Population had dropped from 42,000 in its boom years to barely 26,000. The Empire Detroit steel plant had closed the previous year, leaving 1,300 workers unemployed. Shoe factories that once made Portsmouth the fourth largest shoe manufacturing city in America sat abandoned, windows broken, machinery rusting. Downtown storefronts were papered over or empty. The recession that had officially begun in July 1981 was the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression, and Portsmouth was ground zero. The municipal dock, one of the last remaining active shipping facilities, operated at barely 40% capacity. It was only a matter of time before it closed too. Everyone knew it. The men who worked there knew it, and that knowledge made them vulnerable. Dale William Hoffman was 41 years old that September, though the lines in his face made him look older. 16 years working the docks had given him rope-burned palms, swollen knuckles, and a missing fingertip from a cable accident. He was crew lead for the night shift, the kind of man who arrived 15 minutes early and stayed 15 minutes late, steady, reliable. The backbone of Portsmouth's working class. Dale had 3 daughters. Sarah, 17, had been accepted to Shawnee State University but couldn't afford the $1,200 tuition. Rebecca, 14, quiet and studious. Jennifer, 9, still young enough to believe everything would be okay. His wife, Linda, worked part-time at Kroger, bringing home $87 every 2 weeks. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. But they'd managed, barely, until September 1981 when everything fell apart. They were 2 months behind on the mortgage. The electric company had sent a final notice. Sarah's college acceptance letter sat on the kitchen counter like an accusation Dale looked at every morning. He'd worked 60-hour weeks his entire adult life and still couldn't provide for his family. That hollow feeling in his chest grew larger every day. The other 11 men on Dale's crew weren't much different. Tommy Markham, 34, new father facing $3,200 in medical bills. Jerry Blackwell, 52, Korean War veteran 3 months behind on rent. Bobby Councade, 47, father of 4 who couldn't afford his daughter's braces. Carl Zimmerman, 54, 18 months from retirement, about to lose his house to foreclosure. These weren't criminals. They were Portsmouth invisible men doing invisible work, watching their city collapse around them. The approach came on September 3rd. A man in a dark blue Oldsmobile stopped Tommy Markham in a parking lot. Leather jacket, aviator sunglasses, the kind of expensive look that didn't belong in Portsmouth. He offered Tommy $5,000 cash for one night's work. Just help reroute a shipment. The insurance would cover it. Nobody gets hurt. Just business. Tommy didn't say yes immediately, but he didn't say no either. He drove home to his wife and newborn daughter and the stack of medical bills on the kitchen table, and he couldn't sleep. $5,000, 4 months' salary, enough to clear the debt with money left over. 2 days later, Tommy told Dale about the offer. Dale's first reaction was anger, sharp and immediate. "You don't steal from your employer. You don't break the law. That's not how decent people live." But Tommy kept talking about the medical bills, about his wife still recovering, about being 1 month from losing their apartment, and Dale's anger slowly transformed into something quieter and more dangerous. On September 8th, Dale called a meeting at his house. All 12 members of the night crew crowded into his small kitchen. The offer had grown. $8,000 per man if they coordinated the disappearance of a chemical shipment scheduled to arrive September 14th. The chemicals would be insured. No violence, no victims. Just make the shipment vanish and pocket the money. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Carl Zimmerman, 54 years old, facing foreclosure, said quietly, "I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage. Bank's threatening to take my house. I got nowhere else to go." Bobby Councade nodded slowly. "My youngest needs braces. Insurance won't cover it. Dentist wants $1,200 I don't have." Dennis Walsh stared at the table. "I'm already working 60-hour weeks and I still can't make child support." One by one, desperation spread through that kitchen like a contagious disease. By the time the meeting ended at 11:30 p.m., all 12 men had agreed. Just this once, just to survive. What Dale Hoffman didn't know was that they weren't being recruited for a theft. They were being recruited as witnesses who needed to be eliminated. The man in the blue Oldsmobile, Vincent Calabrese, didn't work for an insurance scam. He worked for a Detroit-based operation that had been systematically targeting Ohio River shipping facilities for 2 years. Their method was simple and brutal: infiltrate the local workforce, recruit desperate men, steal high-value cargo, then eliminate everyone who could identify them. The FBI had been tracking the pattern but couldn't stop it. Portsmouth would be the 9th facility hit. The 12 dockworkers were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. September 14th arrived like a slow-motion car accident. Dale went through the motions of his life with a numbness that felt almost like peace. That Friday, he took his family to the Southern Ohio Fair in Lucasville, bought tickets for carnival rides they couldn't afford, let the girls eat corn dogs and funnel cake, rode the Ferris wheel with Sarah and promised her she'd go to college no matter what it took. "Whatever it takes," he said, suspended at the top of the Ferris wheel, looking out over the dying city. "You're going." Sarah smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. She smelled like strawberry shampoo she'd been using since she was 12. In that moment, Dale felt absolutely certain he was doing the right thing. This was why. His daughter's future, his family's survival, some things were worth any price. Monday night, September 14th, the barge docked at 10:15 p.m. exactly on schedule. The 12-man crew unloaded 220 drums of industrial solvents using the overhead crane. Routine work they'd done hundreds of times. But at 11:28 p.m., 3 vehicles pulled through the facility gate. Not one truck like they'd been told. 3, a dark blue Oldsmobile and 2 unmarked white box trucks. Vincent Calabrese stepped out with 8 other men, all wearing dark clothes, all moving with military precision. Too many people, too coordinated, too professional. Dale's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Vincent walked toward him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, gentlemen. Excellent work. Right on schedule." "You said 1 truck," Dale said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Maybe 2. Change of plans. But don't worry, the payment's the same." Vincent's associates began loading the drums onto the trucks. They worked too efficiently. These weren't thieves improvising a heist. These were professionals executing a plan at 11:43 p.m. Vincent handed Dale a manila envelope. "Your payment. Count it if you want." Dale took the envelope. It was thick, heavy. But looking at Vincent's eyes in that moment, Dale understood with absolute clarity that they'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a simple theft. They hadn't been recruited as accomplices. They'd been recruited as scapegoats who needed to be eliminated. "Actually," Dale said slowly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Vincent's hand moved to his jacket, and Dale saw the shape of a pistol underneath. The smile never left Vincent's face. No misunderstanding, Dale. Everything's going exactly according to plan. Why don't you and your crew step over here for a moment?" The 12 dock workers looked at each other. Bobby Councade's hand tightened on a wrench. Jerry Blackwell took a step backward. Tommy Markham's breathing quickened. At that exact moment, 3 blocks away, Linda Hoffman was washing dishes in her kitchen, completely unaware that her husband was about to disappear forever. Sarah was upstairs doing homework. Rebecca was watching television. Jennifer was asleep, her nightlight casting soft shadows on the wall. Normal Monday night. Just another evening in Portsmouth where families lived their lives and never imagined the violence brewing down by the river. What happened between midnight and 3 a.m. on September 15th was never fully reconstructed. The FBI estimated it took approximately 2 hours to complete. Jerry Blackwell tried to run first, made it 30 yards before 2 shots dropped him near the gate. The other 11 were herded into the storage shed. No screams were reported by nearby residents. Either the sound didn't carry or people who heard chose not to investigate suspicious noises from a dock area at 2 in the morning. Portsmouth in 1981 was a city where people minded their own business. By 3 a.m., 12 weighted bodies had been disposed of in the Ohio River at points where the current was strongest and the depth was greatest. The 3 vehicles drove away, loaded with $340,000 worth of stolen chemicals. Behind them, an empty facility. 12 vehicles in the parking lot, 12 lunch pails on the break room table, fresh coffee in the pot, still faintly warm, and on the concrete near the gate, a dark stain where Jerry Blackwell had tried to crawl toward freedom and failed. The Ohio River flowed on, patient and ancient, keeping its secrets in the darkness. At 6:47 a.m., dock supervisor Ralph Dietrich arrived for his shift and found 12 men simply gone, vanished as if they'd never existed. The barge was empty, the chemicals were gone, and 12 families across Portsmouth were about to wake to a nightmare that would last the rest of their lives. Dale Hoffman's body was never recovered. Neither were the other 11. The FBI investigation identified Vincent Calabrazzi and Marco Duca as prime suspects, but both were killed in a mob dispute in Detroit 3 months later. The case went cold. Linda Hoffman never remarried, worked double shifts for 20 years raising 3 daughters alone. Sarah gave up college. Rebecca struggled with depression and alcohol abuse. Jennifer barely remembers her father at all. 12 ordinary men made one desperate choice when America's economy abandoned them. They weren't heroes, but they weren't monsters either. They were us, or who we might become if the floor dropped out from under our feet and nobody was there to catch us. That's the most terrifying truth of all.